Our scripture lesson comes to us from the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verses 1 through 19. Listen for God's word for you. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Canaan in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, the other two disciples. And Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. And they said to him, We'll go with you. And they went out, and they got in the boat. But that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach. But the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, Children, you have no fish, have you? And they answered him, No. And he said to them, Cast your nets on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, It is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard this, that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and he jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, and they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. Now, when they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish that you have caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, Come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, Who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came, and he took bread, and he gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. And when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, Feed my lambs. A second time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, Tend my sheep. And then he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter felt hurt because he said to him a third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt, and you would go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, Follow me. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It's a good thing I don't rely on my fishing skills for a livelihood. I would starve, Angie would starve, our kids wouldn't have been raised up, they would have not made it, because I am a failure at fishing. I have never been good at it. The only time I ever caught any fish is whenever I was real young, and my dad and I would go fishing, and we would put our poles in, and he would stay there with the lines, and I would go run off, and when I came back, I would always have caught a fish. You know, now I know how that worked. I didn't understand it then, but it's the only time I'd ever caught fish in my life. He would always make sure there was a fish on the line when I got back. Our disciples, they've spent 3 years with Jesus. They've lived with him. They've traveled with him. They have been so close to him. And then he dies. And it feels like it's all over. I mean, they have thrown their whole life into this man and this movement. And then he's back. And he's back in moments. You know, it's not that he comes back with them and is with them for good. He's with them for a while, and then he steps away. And in one of those periods, it says this was the third time that Jesus appeared to them. In one of those periods between times, they're still unsure what they're to do. And when we don't know what to do, we often revert back to our habits and our patterns. And that's exactly what Peter does. He goes back to what he knew before Jesus. You know, he says, I think I'm going to go fishing. And the others, not knowing what to do, they decide, we'll go with you. And so they go, and they're fishing. And probably not the first time ever, but it's not going well for them. They spent the whole night fishing. They've not caught anything. And as the sun begins to dawn and the day's beginning, it's been a rough night of maybe quiet and enjoyment out on the sea. But they're out there and they've had no success. Whenever I first entered into ministry, had a district superintendent who had called us all together, the new clergy, and he, said, you guys, and mostly guys then, although there were women as part of the group, but you probably coming to this with lots of excitement and energy to start in ministry. And if so, you need to know that a lot of ministry involves failure. It involves times when things just didn't work the way you hoped. I had a friend who, after he had been at a church, he'd been there 8 years and was moving. And as they were moving toward the last Sunday when they were together, he preached a sermon, a celebration of great failures. And he talked about several things that they tried to do in ministry during that time period that didn't work. And what he wanted to say to them is that, there's something, even when we try something and it doesn't work, there's something to celebrate about the willingness to risk and to do something new. And so they celebrated the failures that they had gone through. There were successes too, but he wanted to draw attention to that. Maybe there's an importance in noting failure, noting times that don't go quite the way we had hoped. Jesus' death must have felt like failure to the disciples and his followers before the resurrection. They were failing at fishing that day. All kinds of places of failure. Peter failed to stand up for Jesus in the way that he had expected to. He said, though they might deny you, I will never deny you. Didn't he say that to Jesus? And then so quickly it turned and he failed. Failure seems to be a common theme throughout. And yet it's in that moment of failure that Jesus comes to the disciples whenever they have failed to make the catch. The Gospel of John is a fascinating depiction of Jesus' life. And John's Gospel tells the story of Jesus in a very different way than the other three. And the only account that we have of this, Peter tells us about this moment. Do you know what the first miracle in John's Gospel is? It's the wedding. It's the miraculous wine at the wedding when they have run out. And he tells them to fill the pitchers full of water. And then when they begin to serve it, it's wine. And then the very last miracle in the Gospel of John is this miracle of the great catch. Both of them happen right in the area of Galilee, right along the Sea of Galilee, this one in the sea. They're both stories of abundance. And they both seem a little frivolous. Maybe I would say that. A person's life is not healed. someone is not restored, to add wine to the wedding, which they had already had a great deal of wine already, but was not a necessary thing, although it saved the reputation of the family. But all it would have meant was the party was over a little earlier, right? It wasn't a necessary thing. It was a miracle of abundance that blessed one family. It wasn't necessary. No one's life was on the line. No one's life was restored through physical healing. Jesus feeding the disciples, they would have been all right if they didn't have breakfast that day. They would have been all right if they hadn't caught the 153 fish. And by the way, who stops? Anyone but a fisherman? Do they stop and count the fish while the resurrected Jesus stands before you? I mean, here's Jesus just back from the dead, and he's with you, and only a fisherman would stop and count the fish. Because we know that a fish doesn't really exist unless it has a weight and a measurement, right? It's kind of like a baby. If it's not 8 pounds and 6 ounces and 19 inches long, we don't know what it is, right? You can say, oh, well, they just had a baby boy. Oh, well, how big was it? We want to know. Same thing with fish. They have to be measured and quantified and brought into the world. These two miracle stories, one at the very beginning of the gospel, a story of abundance and miracle of blessing. And then here at the very close, this miracle of abundance and blessing. Not a coincidence, I don't think. This whole of Jesus' ministry is surrounded by a sense of abundance, of knowing God's grace that overflows in our lives. One other miracle that takes place in this area is the miraculous loaves and fishes. That's the other one, where all the people are gathered together, 5,000 of them. And he could have dismissed them. Again, another story of abundance, wasn't it? And the young boy comes up and says, well, I've got these fish and some bread. And he blesses it and multiplies it in abundance so that it's overflowing, baskets full at the end. Jesus' ministry is about providing that kind of abundance in our lives. And by that, I don't mean prosperity gospel kind of abundance, but full life. It doesn't say they all were rich. It says that there was a blessing of abundance in fish, that they had more than enough to eat. God blesses us in such ways. It's really kind of amazing. John recognizes him. John recognizes immediately. Peter takes him a little longer. Peter jumps into the water, goes to Jesus immediately. I mean, it's just so typical of Peter, impetuous and just, leaving the other stuff to the other guys. Then when they get there, he pulls the net to go get the fish when Jesus asks for it, But it's the attention moment when he comes and steps up for that. But it's so typical of Peter, so typical of John, too, sitting back and noticing, hey, that's Jesus, right? And not always the one who draws attention to himself. Although he does kind of in the story, it says, the one whom Jesus loved, It doesn't say his name, he doesn't name himself, but he kind of makes allusion to himself in the telling of the story. Really is kind of beautiful just to see the personalities because, we look around and we see the uniqueness of individuals within the life of the church. And, oh, I love this, about this person. Oh, they can be a little quirky that way or whatever. But, we see that they were real people just like we are in the church today, real people. Having our own gifts and our own failings and setbacks. They were following Jesus, and he comes to them in this moment, a moment when they could have just easily been pulled away from the life of following, and he is present to them and he brings them back in, and he helps them find a sense of mission and purpose. He prepares breakfast for them, and they can come and they can sit and eat. It says no one said anything to him about who are you because they knew. But can you imagine their feeling as they just sat with him that morning, eating breakfast together and enjoying being in his presence again? Must have been powerful. After they finished breakfast and the abundance of this miracle, Jesus kind of pulls Peter aside. He wants to talk to Peter. He asks him, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" I was thinking about that, and this week I was thinking through all the music, different songs about "Do you love me?" and you may have seen I posted on Facebook from the Fiddler on the Roof. The song "Do You Love Me?" And there's something about we as people want to know that we are loved. Maybe Jesus sought some of that affirmation, but the fullness of what Jesus is doing is much bigger. Jesus asked him, "Do you love me? Peter, do you love me?" He asked him 3 times. It's real clear that he's giving Peter a chance to make amends for the 3 times that he denied him. He's giving him a moment to make it right, if you will. I think some of us in our lives, we need an occasion to make it right. Some of us find it hard to be forgiven. Maybe you're one of those people where you've done something, you've hurt someone, and you feel bad about that for a long time. Maybe you don't quite ever let go of that. I can remember things that I did to someone in high school, and I don't know why, but in some moment I'll be doing something, and all of a sudden it'll be like I'm all the way back there, and I remember something I've done that hurt someone, and I was like, why in the world did I do that? I wish I could go back and the wiser me be present in those places, or some other moment across life, and what that says is that I think, at least for me, and I think for most of us, we sometimes have a hard time of really being forgiven, of having let go of something that we've done that hurt someone else along the way. I think that Jesus knew that Peter was one of those kind of people, that he was not going to be able to quite let this go. And so he gave him a very tangible way to, in a sense, make amends. Still forgiven. It wasn't that he made it right, but he had a moment to be able to say, for each time that he'd denied him, he got to be able to say back to Jesus, "Yes, Lord, I love you. I love you. I love you." And maybe through that experience, it would allow Peter to be able to just finally put that behind him and move forward. We can carry grudges, maybe that we hold against someone else, but we can also carry a grudge that we hold against ourselves, where we've not allowed ourselves to truly be forgiven and set free. He offers that to him there. The truth is, he offers that to all of us, doesn't he? Jesus gives us an opportunity to lay any of those burdens down that he has paid the price for us, so we don't need to pay the price anymore. We can set it down and we can be free. We can be free to move forward in our lives. And in the same way that he does for Peter, he gives us that opportunity. No one can hold it over his head anymore. There's no one who will remember it. It's over. And he can move forward. Jesus doesn't leave it there, though. Each time he asks him, he gives him a job. And it's to remind him that he has a mission. And it's a mission that he's been on all along. And in fact, it's the mission for all of us. It's not just for Peter. It's the mission that Jesus gives us if we truly love him. Do you love me, Peter? He also, it's interesting, do you love me more than these? Which, is a direct correlation to how Peter said that he loved him more than the rest of them because he would be faithful in following him. So the parallel's so clear in how he is bringing this moment to replace the other. Then he says, feed my sheep, tend to my lambs, feed my sheep, take care of them. And he doesn't mean the church. He means the world. Jesus is not just the shepherd of the church. He's the shepherd of the world. And we're probably the sheep who are gathered together. And there are lots of other sheep that are lost. And we are the shepherds with Jesus. And we are to feed the sheep around the world and in our neighborhood and in our community and the people we see in our workplace and that we come across from day to day. They are in need of being tended, and we are shepherds. We know the shepherd, and we take on his characteristic. It's not just a word we say, yes, Lord, you know we love you, but it translates into action, into doing. So we have to love in the way that we show love and the way that we care in the world. It happens through the ministry of the church, but it's also a ministry for every one of us personally. Every one of us have a place to reach out and to touch someone's life. Made reference to Reggie McNeil last week. He's a Southern Baptist pastor who likes to get rather to the point. And he says he thinks the mission of the church should be going back to what Abraham's mission was, saying that you will be a blessing to the world, and that we should be people of blessing, and that every one of us should take as our commission to bless 3 people during the course of the week. 3 people. He said, don't pick 4, don't want to wear God out, just pick 3. I mean, you don't want to give God too much to do. He wouldn't be able to take care of all that, right? But no, pick 3 people during the course of the week that you can find a way to bless in some small way. Change the measuring stick of how you look at your faithfulness in your life to be something where you measure that in terms of how you are able to impact someone's life. He tells a story of he's a speaker, travels around a lot, consultant for churches, and so he's always eating out, he said. So, he doesn't have an opportunity to always visit with the same people. So he was eating at this restaurant and began talking with the waitress, learning a little bit about her life and her family or how it was all set up. And so he said, while we were visiting, I said to her, in a moment, you're going to bring my food out here, and I'm going to say a blessing for my food. But when I do that, is there a way that I can ask God to bless you? Simple, isn't it? He said, I've done that a million times. I've never had one person ever say, no, please don't. Don't ask God to bless me. As a pastor, I have moments like that a lot of times. I did have one person in almost 30 years of ministry who said, when I asked them if I could pray for them, I was visiting them in the hospital. Their family was a member of the church. He wasn't. And while we were visiting, the OU football game was on, and he did not want me to pray for him. He did not I asked, can I pray for you? And he said no, and so, if someone says no, you don't. And so we, said, okay, well, I will see you later, and left. One time, it wasn't angry or anything like that. It's not a fearful thing, I don't think, to ask someone, can I pray that God will bless you? He said, he was visiting in California at the time. He said it was often near San Francisco doing consulting, where they eat Christians as appetizers, he said. And so, she left. She left the table and went back to the kitchen. And then she came back and sat down. She went to get somebody else to make sure that they could cover the tables, and she came back and sat down. And she said, it's the wildest thing. The guy I live with, he said to me last night, he says, I think I need God in my life. He's never said anything like that in all the years we've been together. And then you came and asked if you could bless me. You know, it's amazing the way God works. There may be someone who you're going to run into this week who God's been laying some stones in their path for them to walk across, and you might be able to be the person who can help them in a moment that you think is totally unconnected, but God's already been at work in their life if you're willing to let God use you. Just something simple. That was his moment, or one of the moments for the week. What would it be like to change in that way? I wrote my newsletter article about it. When Anna got married a month or so ago, it feels like longer than that now, we were at Dauphin Island, Alabama, little Methodist church that's there where we did the service. The minister at that church, he's in about his second or third year of ministry. He's a diesel mechanic. He played guitar and performed in clubs around there. But he was always a person who went to church. But he said, you know, I'd messed up so much in my life, I didn't think there's any way that I had a real purpose in church. And so I never thought that much about it. And then, but somehow God seemed to be calling me into ministry, and he served that congregation. We talked for, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes. He's a really nice guy. I left there thinking, you know, if I were around there, I'd really enjoy getting to know him better, but I'll never see him again in my life. And, you know, we did the wedding. We came on back. This week, 7:30, I'm sitting in the house, and my phone vibrates, and a message. And he says, hey, give me a call when you get a chance. I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? I was going to wait and call after I got to the church, and I thought, you know, if he's up and you know, he's connecting, reaching out at this time, there's probably something going on. So I did. I called him right then, and we talked. We talked for about an hour. There were some things going on in his ministry, in the church, just in his spiritual life as well. And he needed someone to talk to. There were pastors in the community, but they wouldn't really understand the fullness of the situation. There were other clergy, Methodist clergy around the area he could reach out to. But for some reason, it felt safe for someone about 1,000 miles away to reach out to and to be able to talk about what was going on. Just a small thing, a small way that was able to be a blessing in a person's life. And the truth is, maybe that had already happened and I didn't even know it. Maybe through that conversation that took place that felt like enough of a connection that when he was in a moment of need, he could reach out. Maybe there was something that had already happened. I'm so certain that this week there's going to be someone, maybe even 3, that people that come across your path that you can find some way to bless. It's not rocket science. It's not 5 principles or the plan of salvation. He didn't ask, well, are you married, before he prayed a prayer of blessing on this woman, you know. He just was going to bless her. She didn't have to meet any criteria to be blessed, you know, in this relationship. He just offered a prayer of blessing. God gives us such opportunity. I pray that you can find a way, because I know you love him. Jesus asked, do you love me? And I know you love him. I just pray that you'll find a way this week to feed his sheep. Amen.